I take it news of my swine flu has got out. Everyone's moved back one row. So this is my SLUG for Sysadmins talk, and if you found my previous talk really disappointingly non-technical, then don't get your hopes up. I guess I say that partly because, knowing my material, I'm not actually going into the full details of how SLUG works and writing policy, all that sort of thing. I'd cover that a bit. But I guess the other side of that is that it's actually not rocket science either. Getting SLUG to work for a sysadmin is probably the case of you need to know a bit more how it works, but otherwise get it to cooperate with you. So the previous talk was sort of how to get. Oh no. Let's see if I can get it.
Tell us everything about SLUG.
Disappointingly, no. So the previous talk was sort of how to get you to work with SLUG, and this is how to get SLUG to work with you. So I've got a couple of principles, and it's sort of in the same format as the previous talk. I'm basing them on a few more real-world examples, the things that I've come across when I've been wrestling with it. So, as an example, if you're wanting to share home directories through NFS, and I have had this happen to me back in the day when I was running on a UltraSpark 5, and it was faster than using the local disk. That's how awesome the Spark 5 was. So, we have, on the server we have some export of home. On the client we've got it mounted, written up in FS tab, and we go mount home, permission denied. Okay, curse. So the first question we really have to ask ourselves is this actually an SLUG problem? Has SLUG caused this? It could be any number of things. It could be home has the wrong permissions, or you're in the wrong network or something like that. So this is where checking the audit log is a really good thing to do. I think I obviously wrote that out in a bit more detail. So if it is an SLUG problem, then as I covered with the SLUG booleans, if you look for home, we see there's this useful use NFS home DIRs at the bottom that's off currently, and we want to turn it on. And so we use the -p flag so that we remember that over a reboot. And there's your real world example using booleans. And so the reason this is sort of getting SLUG to work for you is because as long as you understand that there's booleans that are going to make your life a lot easier, then that's a really good way to start. And another sort of side observation is if you happen to be sharing home directories out of /temp/ underneath /sudo home, then you may not encounter SLUG permissions, but you will encounter a whole bunch of other problems that may also be caused by Linux, but turning that flag on won't help you at that point. So knowing that you're supposed to share home out of /home is probably useful. If you're wanting to share home directories out of Samba, then you can do the same sort of thing. You've also got this other one, which I pointed out, and was I right? Yes. So it uses a sort of similar convention. Use Samba home DIRs is the permission you need on the client. Samba enable home DIRs is the permission you need on the server. And luckily there's the same kind of thing with Apache enable home DIRs on. You can see from the lack of underscore in home dirs that the people that write SE Linux policy are exactly the kind of slightly scatterbrained people we all are and can't follow naming conventions. But that's okay, that makes them, yes? A microphone? Shout, and I'll repeat it.
Seems like all this naming is pretty arcane. Is there a good source of concentrated in one place to index the stuff or to go from, if you're trying to work with Apache, here's the list of keys you need?
Yep. I'm really glad you asked that question because, and there is, and I'll cover it in a second, but that's one of the, so the basic point to make there is that as well as the policy stuff, there's been a whole lot of useful man pages put together, and I'll get to those in a second. So using booleans where possible to turn the feature that you want on is a really good thing. And if this talk is not technical enough, then feel free to ask lots of really technical questions and I'll see if I can answer them. So if we wanted to share the data directory through Samba, we run into a bit of a problem at this point because there's no Samba export data and Samba export all read write looks a little more inclusive than I'd really want to go with. So we go back to that idea that every file has a context, and there's an example, obviously I left that in. So that specifies the context that we want to use, and it's inherited like your regular directory permissions. If you've got if data has a particular type, then any directory or file that's created under that, unless there's a rule to say otherwise, that will get that particular type. So there's my makedir data, and it has the default type. If I then change that to Samba share type, you can see that's now applied to data. Any file or directory that's written under there gets the Samba share type. Conveniently, Samba share type files are allowed to be shared by Samba. And this is where Andrew's question is answered. There's a whole heap of man pages. So man Samba underscore SE Linux will tell you the booleans that apply, the file contexts that apply, the various other things that you will need to do to work with SE Linux for FTP, named, rsync, HTTPD, NFS, etc. It's really quite comprehensive, and they're quite well written too, in my opinion. So a real world example number 3 is if you happen to be sharing the data directory through 2 different things. The real problem here is that, of course, files can only have one context. We've got Samba share T, but there is also an FTP T that is to be shared by FTP daemons. You can't apply the 2, so what do we do? There's this other boolean called allow FTP use CIFS, but unfortunately that allows the FTP daemon to share things that are on a Samba mount, not cooperate with one. So what do? We start by turning set enforce off, and that works so that at this point that machine is running in permissive mode. We can see that by saying SE Linux enabled and echo yes, and nothing comes out. Then we run FTPD, we test what it needs, write files, read files, create directories, do listings, etc., etc., etc. Do everything that we can think of that we need the FTP daemon to do on that data mount, and then turn it back on. We then grep for those messages in the FTP, so in the audit log. While set enforce is off and permissive is on, it's still generating the warning messages. They go into the audit log, and then we can catch them even though the access has been allowed. trust me on this one, it's much, much easier to do that than it is to run the FTP daemon in enforcing mode, try to FTP into it, catch the first message, generate your policy from there. Apply that policy, and then do the same thing and catch the second message. And I did this, and then I learned how to turn set enforce off. So that sort of 16 operations later. So we then have, at the end of that audit to allow, that basically says create a policy module that SELinux can load, which is going to be called VSFTPD, because that's the one I was using. And we have a PP file, which is the policy file, the policy package file, and a TE file. Why they call this a TE file and not a TXT file, I have no idea, because that's a text file. And it looks roughly like that for those people with good eyesight. What this basically says is we've got an FTPD module. It requires these various objects from SELinux, those two types, and these particular classes of objects. And then we allow VSFTPD to do these things to the directories and these things to files. So in that, you can see I've read and written files and unlinked them and created new directories and all that sort of stuff. We then run se module-i on that policy file, and that will load that. It will compile it into a binary package and compile it and load it into the binary system of packages that you're running now. And that se module-i will actually, that's permanent, and it will stay in there forevermore until you delete that module using a command I've never had to use. If you happen to edit the text file, then you have to do another thing, and now I can't remember what it is, but you then basically compile the text file into the policy package file and load that again. And that's actually covered in the audit to allow man page. Audit to allow is basically a script that runs a bunch of things and then does these steps for you. It used to just say, oh, and now you need to do them, but now it does them for you. So you can, that's the basics of how to create policy for SELinux. And that will cover you in, I'd say, about 80% of the situations that you're likely to come into as a sysadmin. Most of the time, people aren't really crazy enough to share the same files using FTP and Samba at the same time. If you want to share files using FTP and HTTPD, then you can probably just use Apache because it'll do both, and so forth. So my experience is it's actually unusual to really need to create policy. And for this reason, generally speaking, the policy that you're writing has to be as conservative as possible. If we look at that file back here, if for some reason we didn't want the FTP daemon to, say, remove a file from a directory, so remove name from a directory, then we shouldn't have allowed it into that text file. If for some reason there it's loading up the etc. password type and saying FTPD allowed to write to etc. password type, then that's a really good time to think seriously about whether you want this thing to run or not. And it's a really good time to say, no, I'm not going. I'm going to hide that out and compile a policy manually. That situation may simply be an accident of the person writing the daemon. They may have just supplied, in some scripting languages, it will just try to open it for write, and if it can't get it for write, then it'll open it for read. But that's still going to generate that I want to write to etc. password, And in that case, you want SLUG to help you as well as the file system directory or file system permissions. Yeah.
If you've done that and you've made that policy, then you put a file onto the server using FTP, and Samba then access it.
Yes. So yes. So anything written in that directory.
The file's not going to get to BSFTP, the FTP type, and then Samba can't get to it.
That's a good question. And I have to admit, I didn't try this particular scenario out to find out. So the basic question here is if FTP writes a file, we know that Samba's going to write a file in the Samba share type. If FTP writes a file, then it's probably actually going to write the file in the FTP type. And at that point, you may have problems with Samba reading the same thing. The big question here is whether curse. I'm going to. This would be a really good time for me to be able to do a live demo, and unfortunately the thing's over there, and the
Demo's lucky it's over.
yeah. Okay, so sorry.
Russell, is it the stage to take?
Yes, go right ahead.
So you need remote hands?
No, it's so. The general question here is how to make sure that two daemons in, say, FTP and Samba are writing files of the correct type in that directory. And this is where a program called SEManage comes in, and particularly the file contexts. As I said, there's this database of rules for, say, anything with the name, etc. You'd hope it had either been compiled in or they really didn't need to do anything with that. But so in general, I think, yeah, if you're upgrading the kernel, what you're getting is not a new policy, but just a new set of code for handling the existing policy. On your system, under the etc. SELinux policy directory, if I remember rightly, you can find all of the binary files and all of the text files that new modules are supplying for your the policy. When you install that, they come as text files and they're compiled at that point, and which is why when you do an update and you get a new policy file, it often takes a while to load, because it's actually doing the whole recompilation of the security policy as well. But that's basically taking your custom modifications, even things where you've written up your own set of policies or changed the file context rules. Those are now part of that system, and they shouldn't be touched by, as far as I can think. I can't think of any time that they'd be affected by a new package. So it should be robust over upgrade. Can you run conflicting policies? I can't think of a situation where you could, because every file has one context, and you could create a rule, say a file context rule that said, say everything in opt one. You'd try to add one rule that says anything in opt is in the foo type, and then when you next try to add everything in opt is in the bar type, it will go, there's a rule for that already. So it will warn you and not allow you to put in duplicates in that situation. So yeah.
Is there a utility that allows you to basically save your booleans and your type key and restore it to another machine? You know how in ACL you get an ACL
Yep.
pipe it into a file and then go to another directory and set that ACL as recursive.
Yeah, so the question is basically, can I take SLUG policy on machine A and copy it over to SLUG machine B? And the answer is you can broadly by copying the etc. SLUG directory, and that will contain all of the settings from there. It's not something I would do overall, partly because I try to avoid changing a lot of things, and partly because so one of the things that I use at work is Puppet, and if I need to say this special directory needs this SLUG context, that I can actually build that into the Puppet rule. If I then need to say machine B needs to be the same as machine A, I do that in Puppet, and that will do all the processes that will create that policy on machine B.
Sorry, what's Puppet?
So Puppet is a distributed configuration management program. It basically allows you to say, in broad terms, it allows you to say, here's the configuration of a set of nodes, and when that node logs on and talks to the Puppet master and says, what config should I have? The Puppet master compiles up a list of what things should be, what classes it has, and the Puppet daemon then goes away and implements that policy. So installs packages, adds users, turns on services, etc. So it's really quite powerful, and the nice thing about it is you can just add little bits and pieces at a time. You don't have to sort of go, here you go, here's my entire system, and hope for the best. So yes. More questions, or shall we let the one short one and then we can eat some pizza?
Does SLUG have any concept in policies for sockets? As in,
Yep. So there are
says you're not allowed to access it.
yes. So there are policies for sockets, as in network ports. So Apache has there's a policy which says HTTPD type is allowed to listen on port 80, which is of HTTPD port type, or something like that. Which means, as far as I remember the rules, if you wanted to get Apache to listen on a non-standard port, you'd also have to say that port is of the Apache HTTPD port type, which would be, and it's perfectly understandable. You don't want Apache sitting there listening on a high port and waiting for bot commands. And it's the same for outgoing ports. A request to write to a port is treated exactly the same way. Any more questions? Quick, yes? So. Does SELinux work with Debian and Debian with SELinux? Yes. The policy when Debian got it in 2007 was pretty good, but it was still being improved. Now I think it's pretty good. It's very good. It's they're really putting very minor improvements in, and as I said, Ted's case is he's rebuilding file system drivers. It's not a typical workload for SELinux. So.
The irony of that is that he's the one who put extended attributes in the file system, and then he doesn't use SELinux, which is dependent on it.
Yes, you have to. That is a particular form of irony of implementing the very thing that SELinux needs in order to function, and then not using it. So, yeah. So there's a question just in front there.
Yes, your types. In the text file, can you actually nest them? In other words, if you want to make FTP and Samba, and it call it dependent on the other two text files. I don't know the syntax of the compiler.
Ooh, can you make, so with that rule there, that the policy text file that I came up with there, it depended on the class file and the Samba class and the FTP class. That class inheritance is handled in the compilation of from the text file to the binary file. At that point it says, do all these rules make sense with objects that I have in the system already? And that, yeah, so that at that point will say, here's my dependency graph. You can't say it explicitly in the file that I need this other file, but it's the dependency is handled implicitly as you compile the module. Right, well, the smell of pizza is almost irresistible, so I think we'll call it there. Thank you very much once again for having me. And if any of you are coming down to dear quaint provincial Canberra and want to give a talk, then come and see me, because we'd love to have speakers. I think it's a really great thing to be able to go to different lugs around Australia and talk there and meet other people, so bring it on. Password gets the etc password type. Anything in the /temp in bracket, how's it go? I can't remember. It works on regex, so you can actually say anything that looks like a libav codec anywhere if you really want to. So the idea there would be to write a new file context rule that says anything in /data gets the shared by both type, and then write a policy to allow both Samba and FTP to read and write to that type. So at that point, any file created in there will be created under that policy, because there's a specific rule for it, and the daemons both know that they can read and write to it. As I said, it's a complex situation, and it's almost at that point that you need to think, is this the right way of doing this? Is sharing those files through Samba and through FTP a good thing to do, or is there a better way of offering that access? So the other recent tool that I discovered, which started out as being quite boring and now is really awesome, and will probably get a lot better over time, is system config SELinux. That used to just tell you SELinux is on, which was nice, but I could already tell that. Now it will tell you, it will give you a list of the booleans, hierarchically organized, so the ones for Samba are under one section. When you select one, it will tell you what it's for, so it'll give you a description, and when you click the checkbox beside it, it will actually turn it on right then and there, which makes it really important because you've got that 3 or 4 second delay while it updates the policy. At that point, it's really important not to go, is this thing working? Because you'll be turning it on 5 or 6 times, and who knows what state it'll be ending up in. That also tells you all the rules for the file contexts. It gives you a heap of other stuff. And again, all of that's useful information, but it's stuff that it's still not very well presented right now. In system config SELinux, the useful thing is the booleans, but there's no convenient policy file editor. There's no convenient file context editor, any of these things. So I guess we've still got a way to go. And that is more or less the talk that I have prepared. And I really did scrounge around for extra topics to throw at sysadmins. So if you've got any questions, now's a really good time to answer them, because this is probably a very short talk otherwise. Yeah.
How does this fit into things like NFS forms, extended ACLs? Do they conflict?
So how does this fit in with NFS4's extended ACLs? From memory, this now, NFS version 4 now allows the client to see the security, the SLUG contexts on the server. So every file on that share now gets the type, so the SLUG context that's on the server. What used to happen when you mounted NFS, it would be the files under there would be of the NFST type. And at that point, if you were sharing, that's why you have a rule for sharing, etc. home, for sharing/home, because at that point, they're not of the user home type, they're of the NFS type, and you can't have you can't launch a user process into that directory, that sort of stuff. So that solves some of those problems, but likewise, if you're, I can't think, well, is there any situation that you can think of where you're mounting an NFS directory for directories that are going to have a bunch of different types, something like /user or /var or something like that? Has anyone been...
Solaris bumper, which is...
Okay, yeah.
And it's the only Solaris part, so we found a NFS4. It just would be a little easier if you could see those NFS4 attributes from without having to log into Solaris box all the time. Those issues.
Yeah.
Is it SLUG, is it NFS4 attribute, would be trouble.
Yeah, I have to admit I haven't really had a chance to play around with NFS version 4 running across client server yet, so that's still a new one on me, but yeah, keeping an eye on the SLUG contexts across that would be a good thing. More questions? Yes.
This might be a question for the previous talk, but I was just curious, when you update your policy like yum or apt-get, does that overwrite any of your -p changes, or does it remember?
Yeah, so the question is, when you do, say, yum update or apt-get update, and you download a new policy file, does that overwrite any of your, if you're talking about the booleans, which you set with --P, no, it doesn't. So those are basically, the defaults come set in the config. So if for some reason they've added a new boolean, then that will come in the config and you'll get the default. But it won't overwrite the SLUG context, so the Boolean state for that. As far as if you were say installing a package or updating, say, HTTPD, and you'd modified the trying to think what you'd possibly modify, that where you'd modify the type. The situations that I can think of, and I'm more than prepared to be wrong here, but the situations that I can think of where you're downloading, say, a new package, let's say you download a new piece of CGI kit, that should have all the SLUG contexts set, because it's either going into the correct directory or it's got new file context rules. So that shouldn't be actually overwriting anything that you have, and anything that you've set specifically. So if you've got a piece of CGI code in a custom location that you've set HTTP script exect on to allow it to run, that shouldn't be overwritten by another package, so it should keep the same context. So I guess the general answer to your question is, when you do an upgrade, a package upgrade, and you get new policy, or if you get if you're doing an upgrade and you get a new package, then it shouldn't interfere with the customizations you've done to SLUG on your system as well. Make sense?
It's only part of the kernel as well. Like you get SLUG part of the kernel, right? So
Yep.
you get the kernel, you update the kernel with like all the custom policies you built in that.
So yeah, so the
Control set of policies.
yeah, so if you're upgrading the kernel,
Is there a situation where the default policies that come with SLUG would override your custom policies?
there's no situation I can think of where you'd get new policies overwriting either from a kernel upgrade or a policy upgrade. When you're upgrading the kernel, and I think at this stage, after 9 years, we'd hope that if it's extraordinarily unlikely that they're going to say, oh, we really needed to add an SLUG policy to the blah.